Is there conflict between the Black community and the Jewish community?
We see the Palestinian people being portrayed in a large way as people of color. And I think people relate to that. And then if you're American, the discrimination with whites and blacks is real. I'm going to do my part while I'm in this physical body to make sure that I'm representing. I'm that role model for kids to look at.
Welcome back to the Black and Jewish podcast. I have a very special guest with me today, and I'm so excited for our conversation. Florida State Senator Rosalind Osgood. Rosalind, thank you so much for being on the show today.
And thank you for having me.
So you just got back from a trip to Israel. You went with the Greater Miami Federation, and they took a group of state legislators, and you guys went for 7 days or 10 days? 7 days. And this was your first time to Israel?
It was actually my second time to Israel. My first time was in 2015.
Okay, so you've been once in 2015, and then you just went this year in 2024. Yes. What was the difference between your first trip to this trip?
So I am a clergy person, Christian by faith. I went the first time with a church group that was of a different faith of mine, and we saw a lot of the traditional faith-based sites and had conversations about our doctrine and the similarities and the difference. This time I went with a very diverse group where it was more people that are in a different political party than I am. Different religious backgrounds, but I think that these types of experiences are important because our world is diverse, and the more we can have conversations and interact in diverse settings and understand that we may have different religious beliefs, we may be different ethnically, we may have different experiences in life, but conversations help us to build our cognitive capacity where we don't just see the world through our own lenses.
Wow, I really like what you said there, especially with having to go with a group that's from a different party than yours. So you are in the Democratic Party.
I am.
So on this trip, was it half and half, or was the majority of the legislators Republican?
So the majority was Republican. It was 2 Democrats on this trip. It's kind of the environment in Tallahassee where you have 40 state senators for the whole state, and out of that 40, only 12 are Democrat.
Okay.
So in order to get anything done, you need votes.
Yes.
So you have to communicate, you have to talk to people that may be of a different political party, and you really have to focus on issues, and for me, on people.
Before we get deep into your trip in Israel, I want to know, how do you work on both sides of the aisle? Because right now it seems so polarized. And when in 2018, I actually worked for Ileana Ros-Lehtinen in DC, and I was one of her fellows. And I remember coming from California and working for her and thinking, even in 2018, wow, it's so polarized. And I lived in a house where it was 4 Republican girls and 4 Democratic girls. And then we were all friends. And it wasn't like what I thought I seen in the news. And the reason why I loved Ileana so much is because she was Republican, but she worked on both sides. But how do we stop this polarization that we see even now, especially being in an election year?
Well, for me, a lot of it is driven for me by my faith. 34 years ago, I lived homeless on the streets, battling with addiction. So when you're a Black woman with addiction, you experience a lot of the stigmatization, a lot of discrimination, a lot of prejudgment and stereotypes. So I work really hard to not be that person. And I understand that we're not going to all share the same perspectives. But just as human beings, I have to want for me and my kids the same thing I want for everybody else's family and their kids. So I conduct myself by that basic principle. I don't get tied into party politics or attacking people. It's just who I am as a person. And I try to be the voice of reason. I try to listen and understand. And at the end of the day, just because someone has a different political party or a different religious belief, you can't hate them. I'm a senator in a district in Florida, District 32. I represent about 560,000 people. So I'm a Christian. I have white Christian nationalists in my district. I have Hindus, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, and I have to represent everybody collectively. So I have to listen, I have to learn, I have to know what's offensive, what's not offensive, whether I agree with it or not. I govern myself in a way where I don't want to be offensive to other people or cause harm and hurt. And it is a lot of work. But what I've found is if you set the tone and you conduct yourself in a certain way and set a standard, then other people will at least work toward having that standard. Having peace doesn't mean that we all agree, but it does mean that we're not attacking each other, belittling or degrading each other. It's my biggest struggle right now in the political climate, where you just see constant attacks on people as individuals, on their families, and it's just not the way that we should conduct ourselves.
That's so true. I always say, why are we, digging up the wife or the children or this cousin and what they do in their private life and what has happened to their marriage? It's like, that is very private information and it has nothing to do with the policies you may make for me, So like, can we focus on policies and not attacking people? I like what you said about harm, because we have in the Torah, we have a law about harming people emotionally, and that we are not allowed to actually cause harm to someone emotionally. And we never think about that because we think about harm as in terms of physical, but attacking people in the ways that we do attack people, we can cause harm to them emotionally. And we should, be more diligent at taking care of people's feelings, even though everyone's like, facts over feelings, Yeah.
Even with judging, none of us are supreme. We all have areas that we can improve in. And I just go back to the stigma around people that have substance abuse disorders, where people characterize people, we kind of want to pick and choose who gets grace, who gets certain privileges and benefits. And it shouldn't be that way, because as people, we're all equal. One person may have more money, someone may have more education, but it does not authentically make us better human beings than the next person.
Correct. Okay. So you get to Israel, you're there for 7 days. Tell me about your first day in Israel.
So we first went into Tel Aviv, and we started out doing different visits of different things. And then we went into kibbutz, where we actually got to talk to people that had experienced the various tragedies, the tragedy that happened, had lost loved ones. We got to a certain point where we met people that had been taken hostage. And when I went, I'm a person that's about peace. I don't like violence in the community. I just don't like the whole notion of violence. So I'm thinking in my mind, if we just stop shooting, stop killing each other, all of this could just go away. And as we went on the trip and I learned more about Hamas and Hezbollah, terrorist groups that are literally killing everybody, literally are on the attack. And when we cease fire, they get stronger, they build. So I began to reflect. I can remember being in my room this one night, and I was just thinking, I'm a person that, don't carry a gun. I live at home. My kids are grown, but they do visit sometimes. And I began to think, if someone broke into my house and they tried to hurt my kids, I would be forced to hurt them before they hurt my kids. So
violence is necessary at times.
Yeah, because you have to try to stay alive and survive. And my background is public administration. It's a very ambiguous field, and we try to put all the pieces together in public administration. And then just being clergy and being a Christian and looking at the Bible, the Old Testament and New Testament, and coming to the conclusion that life is not black and white. There are a lot of gray areas. There's evil, just like there's a force of good, there's a force of bad. And I think we grow up very naive, thinking ultimately that good outweigh the bad. And I believe that, but sometimes the good has to fight to outweigh the bad. I'm a Christian. I believe in the Bible. When Joshua was going into the land of Canaan, they had to take it by force. They had to fight.
Yep.
We live in a time now where we have groups like Hezbollah, Hamas that wants power and control to the extent that they don't care about killing women and children. So if you're on the other side as Israel, you have to fight to protect the family and the children. When I first went to Israel and went through the Holocaust Memorial, I was at some point moved to tears and literally couldn't move for a couple of minutes when I was exposed to the number of children that was so innocently killed. What kind of heart do a person have that they would just kill innocent children? If I'm true to my religion as a Christian, it's all throughout the Bible, the different groups, the Moabites, they would actually sacrifice children. Mm-hmm. So as we try to live in a world as decent people, I think that there should be some boundaries. But there are groups of people that have no boundaries. And it puts us in a position where we have to fight. We have to protect. We have to defend. If I truly believe that children should have an opportunity to live and grow and thrive, then I have to create those opportunities. Whether it's fighting against terrorists, fighting for equal access to health care, fighting against an unfair, unjust criminal justice system. It's different ways that we have to fight against those things that just go against basic human survival and human decency.
I know prior to the trip you were pro a ceasefire. Where are you at with that now?
I'm still struggling because I understand the necessity of taking out terrorist groups. I understand that when you have leadership whose goal is to exterminate a certain group of people, I believe it goes against what my faith principles are. I believe in God, and I believe that it's about us and whosoever will. And so we have to fight against evil. And it positions you where you have to take a stand for protection and justice. When I, was looking at the news this week and seeing now Israel is planning an attack back. If you don't respond back, it's just like bullying. If someone bullies you and you do nothing, it just gets worse.
Yes.
So it's not as black and white as we look at it. But I think the more we learned about terrorist groups, I was very naive about Hamas and Hezbollah and this whole massive plan to destroy a certain group of people. And I think what the media does is they make it about Jews and Muslims to pit one against the other, or black and white, instead of focusing on the issue. If Hezbollah is killing people, Jews, blacks, Muslims, we need to tell the whole story.
Yes.
And we need to be against it. We talk about this whole notion of a two-state government, but we never talk about it to the extent that if we went to a two-state government, who would be in charge of the Palestinian government? The Palestinian people certainly don't want Hamas and Hezbollah in charge of that government.
Right.
So I think the more conversations and knowledge and understanding we have of things, I think our perspective and the revelation of the position that we're going to take, it evolves. I think a lot of times we're limited in perspective because we're limited in knowledge and information, and we don't talk to each other. I try to be very intentional about visiting other countries, getting outside of the United States. You know, I've been to Dubai, India, Turkey. I spent a lot of time in Jamaica. Hopefully one day I'll go to Haiti. But I think we continue to build our intellectual capacity by reading, traveling, and conversing. What we have a tendency to do is keep ourselves in a box and think that the whole world should look like that box. We want to force everybody to fit into a box. And that's just not the reality of the way that we live from day to day. And if I want certain rights and certain freedoms, then I have to want those rights and that freedom for everybody when they have a different perspective, a different lived experience than I've had.
Do you think, in your personal opinion and in your thought process, and then also for the Democratic Party, do you think they believe that ceasefire is synonymous with peace? Because I live in Jerusalem, and I remember seeing all of the media come out, ceasefire, 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 and I was thinking to myself, but what about our hostages? I don't hear enough about bring them home, you know? We had 1,000 Black pastors go to Joe Biden and, you know, demand that there be a ceasefire. And so, you know, first when you see this as a Jewish person, you're thinking, they don't care about us, you know? But now as I hear you speaking, and obviously you can't speak for everyone, I'm starting to understand people think ceasefire is synonymous with peace. Was that your thought process?
I focus more on just not killing people, but I do agree with you. I think a lot of words that we use, I could have one understanding of that word and you could have another understanding of that word. For example, Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter to me is not an organization in Washington, D.C. It is a thought and a philosophy that it's not okay to rape, kill, lynch, hang, and just devastate people because of the color of their skin. I also believe that other people's lives matters as well. So when we use terms, a lot of times we use them without explanation, without talking or speaking to what those terms mean. And because we don't spend a lot of times talking to each other, we don't know that there are different perspectives. Like I said earlier, I represent a very diverse group. So I have a population of Black Jews in my district. I can have conversation with white Jews who don't necessarily believe that there are Black Jews.
Right.
And I have this one gentleman in particular who's kind of traced his roots all the way back. And then being a Christian and the Bible in the Assyrian and Babylonian captivity, you know, when we say we're Jewish, are we saying it ethnically or are we saying it because it's our choice of our faith belief? And it's those kinds of details and discussions that we don't have. So you can say that you're a Black Jew and know what it means to you, but if you don't have the opportunity to share that experience or what that means or what you mean by that, then people can act in a form of ignorance. When we look at Black pastors and their perspective, I think they are just like all of us are. We're trying to figure it out. I try to go and I try to listen. I try to keep my mind open. I think that's what God would have me to do. I think that as I expose myself to different experiences, different countries, different cultures, that God gives me revelation and better understanding. And then my faith or what I believe through his spirit guides my decisions. And I think that's what's missing a lot of times. I have talked to Evan, who is the community outreach person for the Broward Jewish Federation, about, you know, giving those experiences to Black pastors, Black kids, where you don't hear the word Jew and you're afraid because you don't understand. You don't hear the word Muslim, you're afraid and you don't understand. You hear, the negative things about immigrants, people that are not American. We all come from other backgrounds and a mixture of things. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So when we say immigrants, what do we mean by that? You understand what I'm saying? And I think those are the kinds of things that keep us divided and keep us not understanding and being open to information. And I think the more we build our intellectual capacity and we exercise our faith, I think it's the time we spend in doctrine. For you, it's the Torah. For me, it's the Bible. In prayer, whatever that looks like to us, it moves us to a better understanding of humanity. And that understanding tells us that humanity is just that. It's not a one-size-fits-all.
I love that. I really love that. Speaking of Blacks and Jewish people and Black Jews, and that's why I wanted to start this podcast, the Black and Jewish podcast. One, because I'm Black and Jewish, but I wanted to start opening up these dialogues, to have conversations that people are not having, so we could fully intellectually understand each other, like you said. But in your district, do you see, is there conflict between the Black community and the Jewish community? And my second part question is, why do you think so many Black people tend to fall on the pro-Palestinian side in terms of seeing their story like our story, Black American story?
So in my district, there's not conflict because everybody stays in their silo. Like, I work real hard to build community. When I'm on certain sides of my district, I feel, the tension of people like, why is she here? Well, I'm your senator. I don't care what your religious belief is. I don't care what your ethnicity is. And I think when we take the whole argument, I think the media and a lot of misunderstanding has come forth about Palestine. It's the Black side and the Jewish side. It's the white side. It's the same old racism that continue to keep us divided without knowledge and information. I can, even from my perspective, when we talk about the tribes of Abraham, what does that really look like? That kind of includes all of us, if you really want to get down to it. And I think that a lot of times there's a lack of information where racism is the driving force. A lot of the things we see on TV, we don't see a lot of pictures of Black Jews on TV. We see the Palestinian people being portrayed in a large way as people of color. And I think people relate to that. And then if you're American, the discrimination with whites and Blacks is real. And it influences thoughts where we see someone that look like us or may have the same hue, and we have a tendency to relate to that person more so than somebody with a different hue, than trying to get an understanding. I served 9.5 years on the Broward School Board, and one of my good friends was Lori Levison, who is an avid Jew. She was very surprised to hear that I understood, Hebrew and different things from the Torah. I'm a clergy person. I'm formally trained. So when you go to seminary, you study all religions because that's how you can be reassured of your own faith. So we would have, conversations, and we built just a wonderful, wonderful relationship. We would talk about, she would say, well, it offends me when someone pray in the name of Jesus. And we would have those conversations. I said, well, I have a different perspective. Everybody should be able to pray in their own faith tradition. My issue is when somebody is shut down or excluded. So we had a point where we have resolutions to celebrate the Holocaust, Black history, various religious groups. So I brought forth the resolution to have Muslim Heritage Day. I'm not Muslim, but the school district is diverse. So the same thing I want for me in my religion, I got to be open to giving that right to everybody and not excluding. We had resolutions to celebrate LGBTQ heritage. And of course, being of Christian faith, people kick back with that. But I believe in the principle of love. And we cannot not love people because of who they sleep with, who they love. We cannot not love people because of their choice of what their faith is going to be. So I think a lot of these types of issues, if we do more self-reflection and we focus on valuing people and not trying to clone ourselves, it gets us beyond that point. Evan and I hosted this group called Shaka a few years ago. And this group is very intentional about building relationships with Muslims and Jews. And we brought them to the Old Dillard Museum, which is a historical Black museum in my district. And we just had a great time hearing from everybody. It was us, not things that we differ on to divide us. There's always common things that we can build upon. I think that the lack of conversation and the lack of interaction between Blacks and Jews has broken down over the years. Because when I look at Dr. King, I look at the civil rights movement, it was us. There were, Jewish rabbis that lost their life marching and protesting for civil rights for all of us. And I think we've just gotten away from the basic value of standing up and supporting. And that's why it was important to me to be with the Broward Jewish Federation after what happened in October. As a Christian, I'm not okay with people being attacked and being killed. I'm not going to sit on in my little area and not go speak out about what's wrong, what's unjust, what's evil. And I think we have to come to a place where we speak out against wrong and injustice, and not just when it's happening to us. We have marches in our community where the police mishandles Black people, and the Black community will say, well, nobody's standing with us. But when we have something that happened in the Jewish community of the same sort, or even the Muslim community as well, or the gay community, then we don't go and support. So I think we have to be consistent in our stands and our perspectives.
How can we get each community to support each other more? Because I hear that similar sentiment from the Black community saying, well, Jewish people are not standing with us. And then the Jewish community feeling after October 7th, well, we supported Black Lives Matter and, we give money to X or we give money to Y. Why aren't all the Black people supporting us? And I always like to, from the Jewish side, inform them that, listen, there's two people in a relationship. And so it can't just always be all the Black people's fault of why the Black and Jewish relationship broke down. There's also things on our side as the Jewish people too, that we both need to do to work together. It's not just, in a marriage, the marriage fell apart because the husband was just terrible. It's like, no, there was also things that the wife did, And so I think it's really hard for people to take accountability for why a relationship broke down. And it's really hard for, especially if you see yourself as the victim in the relationship, to say, okay, maybe I contributed to the breakdown of this relationship by X, Y, or Z. But what solutions do you think could work to just have a little bit more of that synergy, not just between Blacks and Jews, but like you said, Muslims as well, or LGBT communities, where we come out and we just speak against injustice, period?
So Evan and I work with this other group called Faith in Florida. And the mission of Faith in Florida is to build a beloved community. We work in an interfaith space.
Okay.
So before October 8th, we had a very strong interfaith group, to the extent that a couple of years ago at the Jewish Federation in Broward, we did an interfaith candlelight ceremony.
Okay.
Where we had Christians, Jews, Muslims, and the LGBT community represented. It was fabulous. Then we had this horrific massacre that happened with Hamas. And it just kind of broke our group apart.
Wow.
In the extent that everybody is hurting and mourning from their own area, their own perspective, because when you see hate is always bad for us all. When hate start running rampantly, it's gonna ultimately, devastate us all. And that's the way we have to see it. I think the Jewish Federation is on the right track with being intentional about bringing diverse group of people to Israel. Most people don't understand. They've only read about it. They don't understand. As a Christian, the first time I went and I was on the Sea of Galilee, Lake Tiberias, I'm reading the Bible and it keeps saying that Jesus is crossing over to the other side.
Right.
Well, once I went, I understood why he was crossing over to the other side.
Yeah.
I grew up in a very male-dominated culture that always talks about Mary Magdalene as a prostitute. I go to Israel. There's a whole town called Migdalia that holds her in high esteem. There is no evidence anywhere to prove that she was ever a prostitute. So the traveling and the exposure, I think it helps. I know it's difficult because there's always a cost to it. But if we're going to really make change and educate each other and come to better understanding, I think that some experiences are needed. It's a little beyond what we see in a textbook. I can even take Christianity. For me, Christianity is not white Christian nationalism. I don't believe that the Constitution and the documents that formed America are more supreme than God. And I think that anything that we put in place as humans, we can do our best, but it's flawed and it's open to be tweaked and improved if it's not given true justice and equality for everybody. So I think that continuing the conversations like what you're doing with your podcast, being intentional about reaching out to people that normally wouldn't be in the space. As a state senator, because of my background, I spend a lot of time talking to people that are homeless, people that are often voiceless in the process, people that's battling with mental health issues, trying to understand so that when I'm making policies, I at least have their stories in my heart to influence my decision. And a lot of times we operate from a perspective of superiority. I have Lori Berman, that's a Jewish senator. Immediately once I got in the Senate, I started interacting, asking conversations. Is this, offensive to you as a Jew? I don't know. Explaining when you say stop woke, that's offensive to me as a Black person because being woke means I'm responsible, I'm working, I'm involved, I'm a productive member of society. Not being woke means I'm sleep and lazy and I'm not doing my share of my part. But if I don't have that conversation with her, she doesn't know what that means.
Right.
When you give me a curriculum that says you don't want me to talk about sexism, racism, and oppression in basic courses, then I'm going to say, okay, I don't want you to talk about Black inferiority complexes in those courses, because to me that levels the playing field.
Right.
So I can be okay with what you're saying, but here is what I need to have happen too. If we're going to talk about Black history, let's not start it with slavery. Black people had built civilizations before they were ever tricked on a boat trip that turned out real bad for Black people.
Right.
So I think it's just being in environments where we're not defensive, that we listen and we learn. And I think it helps us come to a better picture of the world. It's also humbling because it's just not about you as an individual. It's a big old world. And I think the lack of knowledge, the lack of dialogue, the lack of building those relationships, it's like almost we fear interacting with people that are not like us for some reason. And when you look at history, that's how we kept improving. History gives us the empirical evidence of best practices that we should continue. And it also teaches us the horrible lessons learned that we should never repeat. So the more we understand history, we understand different cultures. I mean, and we're all kind of guilty of just kind of ignoring the whole indigenous Indians.
Right. I mean, I always say, like, Israel should be a social justice warrior's dream. Like, an indigenous people went back to their indigenous land and created estates. What do you believe is the biggest or the top misconception about Israel?
I think the biggest conception is about Israel is when I went on my first trip there, I saw Jews and Muslims living in communities just like I do with blacks, whites, and people that are different, and they were getting along just fine. I think that there's this myth that in Jerusalem, in Israel, that you have this constant horror going on between Jews and Muslims, and it's just not that way. I also learned that if you shop in the Muslim quarters, you can get better deals than you can in the Jewish quarters.
Yeah, everything in Israel is negotiable as well. You can negotiate those groceries, the market, everything's negotiable.
But it wasn't, when I went there, that was the thing that surprised me most, because what I had saw on television or what I had heard was this major war. Yeah. And you go there and you see people coexisting. You see them practicing their different faiths, and nobody's attacking or harming each other.
Exactly. And can you speak to the diversity of Israel in terms of skin tone? Only because here in America, everyone says the Jews are white. Yeah,
no, it's not.
And then
true.
Israelis are just confused as to why do they keep calling us white. So can you speak to the beautiful different types of Israelis that you've seen while in Israel?
Yeah, all shades, very diverse with the Jews. And even with the Palestinian people, it's very, very diverse. But that's not what people are accustomed to seeing. Right. It's just like as a Christian, at some point there start being a white picture of Jesus. Yeah. Then it start being a Jesus with dreads and, and we believe that it's a spirit. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. So I think there are a lot of
no image.
Yeah. There are a lot of misconceptions. And when we look at the way that we all are interrelated, we marry people. People love who they love. Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee for president right now, is married to a white Jewish man. And it's okay. Yeah. And I think that's where we have to get, the place we have to get to. Yeah. And work through all of these stereotypes and myths that we have.
Do you think we're going to get to that place? Because even speaking about Kamala Harris, for one, I'm not in support of her candidacy. However, I don't like the type of attacks she's getting. They're not attacking her policies. They're saying, well, this is a black woman who is with a white man. And I'm like, well, that's why she shouldn't be president? It doesn't make sense. I'm like, when are we going to push past that? I don't care that her husband is white.
But that's what we do. We find something and weaponize it against each other. I'm not in favor of President Trump's candidacy, but I wasn't okay with somebody trying to take his life. Right. It's a human being. Right. And I think that that's the core genesis of where we have to be. The argument should be a policy argument. Yes. Not a personal attack on the person. I mean, I can go through Democrat, Republicans, NPA, various political parties as a black person and see the injustice that was done. Yes. So I think when we look at policies, it gets us away from saying that somebody don't deserve something because of who they sleeping with or who they married to or something that they got in their past. And whether they're a black woman. And being a black woman in the political circle, it's very hard.
What are the challenges?
It's a lot of challenges with the stereotypes. You know, if you passionate, you are considered to be angry. Some things you should be angry about. When I look at mass incarceration and literacy rates of children of color, I'm not going to be happy about it.
Right.
I'm going to have a righteous anger that's going to compel me to act. But it's constant critiques from your hair, just all kind of trivial stuff that really don't matter with policy, you know, and what you're trying to do to make the world a better place. And I think that when we think about the system that's set up, we have different leaders for that reason. But it's a problem with any leader that wants to be a dictator. I don't care who it is. And so as you move through the political sphere, we have to make sure that we're not turning into something where we're worshiping individuals, or we're worshiping a party, or we're worshiping the Constitution. I think for all of us, that's where our faith, whatever that faith is, keeps us at the balance. But just because you have a different political belief, you're a different party, a different race, when I start hating you and being okay with you being shot or something horrific happening to you that I wouldn't want happen to me and my family, and I'm okay with it, then I have to self-reflect. Because it means my soul, my spirit, or however we look at that, is definitely not in a good place.
Talk to me about your spiritual experience in Israel. What did you feel? What type of revelations did you have while you were there? What was, if you want to share, I know that's intimate, but what was your spiritual experience? Because I live in Jerusalem and I've been here in Miami for the summer, and I call my friends all the time and I remind them, I know we're in a war and it seems hard, and you know, it's not easy to make money in Israel, and the American dream and the American dollar is so much better. But I try to remind them, like, you are so privileged to live on holy land. You know, like it's a place where when I go to Israel, I feel ascended. Like I really do feel like I'm going up, and like my prayers are just, you know, God's everywhere, but you know that my prayers are just answered there. So I'm really curious to know, what was your spiritual experience in Israel?
So when I went to Israel this time, well, I'll start with the first time I went. I was at the Jordan River, and people were getting baptized. I didn't get baptized because I don't believe that you should be baptized a second time. That's just my belief. But I saw this one lady there who was obviously struggling, and she got baptized again. She went back into the water, and she had this tablet thing in her hand. And I guess it was a journal. And she started just ripping the pages from it. And whatever was going on with her, when she came out of that water, I could literally sense the calmness. She was speaking another language. I don't know what was happening. On this trip, we went to Capernaum. And while we were there, we were in this place that's been made into kind of like a synagogue of where it was kind of a type or a replicable of Peter's mother's house. And, you know, while I was in there, I just started praying, and I just became very grateful. You know, when I reflect back over my life, the choices and decisions that I made, the near-death experiences I've had from, you know, being in drug houses and them being shoot up and the bullets didn't hit me, from having a 2-year battle with cancer, and just knowing that it's a force greater than myself that keeps me alive every day. My spiritual experience was one of just deep gratitude to even be, you know, in Israel with, you know, the group that I was there with. None of that technically should be, but God orchestrates things in our life where we get to experience things that we can't make happen ourselves. You talked about holy and high places. I think my trip to South Africa, I've been to South Africa twice, Durban and Johannesburg. And I can remember the first time I went to Durban, I went for a World AIDS conference, and it was about 60,000 people there. HIV was running rampant in Africa, although there was a lot of medicine there. People were not taking the medicine because they didn't have food. And on that trip, I was there with a group of male pastors. I'm not a pastor in the sense that I pastor a congregation. And this one night we went to church, and we went into this church and we walked in. People were just praising God, and they were singing just on a whole nother level. I mean, laying out on the ground, just thanking God. And I'm saying, these people live in huts. And I just really felt that God was high and exalted in their life. It was a holy God, a God that was high and lifted up. And I remember that night going back to my room, feeling very convicted. You know, I talked to a few people there. Earlier that day, we had visited a clinic. I met a lady that told me she walked like 8 miles, you know, to the doctor. It was obvious that she was really sick. The whole clinic was about as big as this room. Wow. And she was saying, if they don't see me today, I'm going to have to walk tomorrow. And I just began to be convicted, because here I am. I have my car. I have insurance. I go to the doctor's office. If I'm waiting longer than 30 minutes, I'm whining and I'm complaining. Yeah. You know, I got insurance. I don't use all the insurance. So that was kind of life-changing for me, that I came back, I get my ears checked. Whatever insurance I have, I use it all now because of having that encounter with that lady and realizing how ungrateful I was. And so when it comes to, you know, spiritual experiences, I think that is for us, whatever it is for us as individuals. For me, it's personally trying to be a better person every day, and sometimes falling short, but being able to acknowledge that and do better. And I truly believe that there is a power greater than me. And I think that we have a lot of definitive answers that we try to intellectualize, that we're just not that smart. Like, I can't put God into the confinements of my limited mind, no matter how many degrees that I have. But I could work to try to be a better person, you know, knowing that I'm going to struggle day by day. So a lot of my spirituality is based on prayer. It's based on, you know, continuing to study the Bible. It's based on just really being honest about my personal life, my thoughts. You know, a lot of times we feel a certain way about somebody that'll go shoot somebody with a gun. But what about the things we say to cut people down? Yeah. To hurt them, to make them feel less than. Yeah. So I think it's this whole transformation that we try to have some type of intentionality about our words being impeccable. I think that's especially important if you're a leader, that you don't just say things and repeat things that are not facts, that are not real. There are a lot of things you don't know, and you have to be able to say that so that you don't misspeak. And then give grace to everybody. I know that I have, you know, my faults and my failures. So the next person is going to have their faults and their failures. But how do we work together and move forward? And then I think for me, the most important thing spiritually is protecting my heart. Because I believe, you know, what's in our heart controls how we think and how we act. So if my heart is full of judgment, unforgiveness, malice, anger, resentment, then that's going to control my thinking. It's going to cause me to mistreat people, mishandle the moment. So I try to protect my heart and fill my heart with love, peace, and grace. And it's a continued work. It's something that we have to work on. And I think overall, I think most of us have bought into this concept of professional development, but we really like in personal development. And I think they go together. Yeah. And for me, the spiritual part, you said, are we ever going to get there? I have to hope that we can. based on my faith, I kind of subscribe to this thought of this philosopher, Jürgen Moltmann, who talks about hope being incongruent with current reality. I have to believe that there's a power greater than me that's going to help us get to a place where the world continues to get better. When I look at history, I see the evidence of that. Although we're still battling, we're still fighting, we still don't understand each other, I do believe that things have gotten better and they will continue to get better. I can't just surrender to that it's never going to get any better.
Right.
You know, things are never going to change. I don't know when, but I'm going to do my part while I'm in this physical body to make sure that I'm representing. I'm that role model for kids to look at, that we can be better, that we don't have to operate in hate and judgment and malice against people. You know, we talk about rights. You know, what does that really mean? For me, it means just what I want for me and my family. I got to want that for the next person in that family.
Yes, yes. I want to ask you one last question. What can the Black community give to the Jewish community that they could benefit from? Something from our culture, our mindsets, you know, how we operate as a people. And what can the Jewish community give to the Black community? Something from their culture, something from how they operate in their society that can be equally beneficial to each other.
I think we can give each other the courtesy of education, explaining the cultures to each other. And where we agree, we can build upon. Where we disagree, we don't have to hate each other because of it. Because a lot of the Black culture, a large part of it is Christian. Mm-hmm. So there's the Old Testament and the New Testament. Mm-hmm. But you can't get to the New Testament without the Old Testament. Mm. And I think a lot of it, if I'm a Black Christian and I believe in the Old Testament, the prophets were foretelling the coming of the Messiah that I choose to call Jesus, that takes me from under the law to grace. I got to understand the law before I can get to the grace part, in order to really appreciate the aspect. When I look at the different religions, the Muslims are devout and praying 5 times a day. Right. You know, what they eat. I think we can learn from each other. Mm-hmm. Well, right now we just X each other out because it's different. Right. I think that there are certain tenets that we can learn. When you look at the Hindus, they have certain practices of loyalty. Yeah. That we can all learn from. Right. So I think that if we take that approach, it gets us to a better place. At the end of the day, I think that we all want to be loved and valued for our spiritual beliefs. And I think because we don't talk and we don't hold each other accountable, I think that we can be very guilty of not giving that same courtesy to the other. Mm-hmm. I'm a native of Broward County, and it's still a lot of have and have nots, a lot of superior thinking within the Jewish culture, the Christian culture, the educated, the uneducated. You know, I could just go on and on. And when you look at the school districts where you have over 232 languages represented, it tells you just how diverse we are. Yeah. I have a 9-year-old granddaughter, Kyla, and she has several friends, mostly that don't look like her. They could care less about any of that. They just genuinely love, but we teach them to mistreat each other. We teach as them they grow older. Yeah, they learn it from us. Yeah. And we have to be accountable for that. And we have to take responsibility for that. When we say, you know, we're not going to deal with certain people because they're Muslims and, They wear the hijabs or something. That's what we got to get away from. So when I look at Broward County and I think about the Jewish population and the Black population, I think what has happened over the years, in the older days, my grandmother, I was raised by grandparents. My mother and father were teen parents, and my grandmother took me on 2 days old from the hospital. But I remember this particular one white Jewish lady. My grandmother was a presser. She ironed clothes. And she was an entrepreneur. She always had a side hustle. And she worked for this one Jewish lady for a very long time. But it was this lady that, took her in the Burdines to shop when, it was downtown and they would follow Blacks. But when she went with the lady she worked for, that didn't happen. Taught her about building her credit. It was a type of unity, a type of building family. My grandmother was very good with teaching her how, to raise kids and different things. My grandmother could cook exceptionally. So teaching her how to cook, we had more of that than what we have now. I think in our quest for this imagery of American dream, to be rich and powerful, it has taken us away from the core values of community. And I think it's something about this sense of belonging that's innate in the way that we were all created to love, to want to share, to be in communication. But now we've become so isolated in many different ways. The educated don't want to hang out with the uneducated. The young people tired of the old people, and I could just go on and on. The Jews are in their corner, the white Jews in one corner, the Black Jews in one corner, the Black Christians in one corner, the white Christians in one corner. I can remember after George Floyd, I was really moved emotionally because I have 2 Black sons. And just to see what happened and nobody did anything. And I remember talking to some of my white evangelical friends and just being at a point that I was just fed up. So I needed to understand, in their churches, they do altar prayer for divorce, for homosexuality, for alcoholism, but never for racism. And I don't think that all white people are racist.
Yeah.
But it's certainly an issue that we can't ignore. And racism manifests itself in different ways. So once I asked them that question, they were quiet for a long time. Then some of them began to cry. And because we were moving to this virtual space, I started seeing different things happening in their churches. If we say that it's wrong, whether we characterize it as a sin or not, if it's wrong and we say alcoholism is wrong, divorce is wrong, homosexuality is wrong, then how do we leave racism off the table?
Right.
So we have to be consistent in our messaging and what we're doing as people of faith. And a lot of it comes with holding ourselves accountable.
Back to that personal development that you were talking about. Senator Rosalind Osgood, thank you so much for coming on. I've been very, very moved by everything that you've had to say today. I actually feel the love in my heart that you're talking about, like just being in your presence. I feel like the non-judgment, the relaxation, the be authentic, be yourself, and just show up. And I hope more people will do that, especially as they're surrounded by you, because that's the atmosphere you kind of cultivate. I know people can't feel it because they're watching, but I feel it sitting here with you. So I just want to thank you for taking your time out today to share wisdom and share your experience about Israel.
And thank you for having me. And, I've gone through a lot in my life, and I don't want to miss the mark. And I think God has gifted me, even in a political circle, where I just say how it is. And I know that it's going to be judgment, it's going to be pushback, but there are a lot of people that could be at a different place in life if they were not afraid of the stigma and the hate that comes with just being who they are. And when we look at the suicide rates with our children, we have to take some accountability. It's okay to buy clothes, to give education, but what are we doing to strengthen each other as people?
Yeah.
And I believe whatever your faith belief is, for me, that's what it boils down to.
Yeah.
So I am grateful. I'm grateful for my experience in Israel. I'm grateful to be alive. I'm blessed to even be able to sit in the presence of amazing young people like yourself that's forcing these conversations and these issues, because this is how we make the world a better place for all of us to work, live, and play.
Oh, man. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. Wow. Okay, you guys, that is a wrap on this episode. Like, comment, and share. I want you guys to comment down below. How are you going to take what Senator Osgood said about personal development? How are you going to implement that in your life? Comment down below that we need to, how can we be better people? How can we work on ourselves? How can we spread more love? And how can we have more dialogue with people who do not look like us or even believe like us? I will see you guys next week. Thank you.